victim he clearly thinks that he is. I am the only person in all of this who never had a choice. I ask this court to impose the full sentence allowed under the law because of everything he chose to do to me.
Thank you.
All right, any proof from the defense?
Judge, first off, I understand that the victim has a right to make her statement and so forth, but I feel compelled to at least object to two things that she's mentioned over and over in her statement. One has to do with the negotiations, which are inadmissible under any circumstances that I know of in any proceeding. The second, her criticism of the exercise of his right to go to trial. So I would at least note an objection with regard to that.
Your objection? Any proof?
Yes, my first witness will be Mike Lingard.
How many witnesses do
We
you
have
have? What?
four real witnesses, Judge.
Michael Wingard,
Where do you live?
Spell your last name, please.
Wingard.
And you know Brandon Banks?
Yes, sir.
You know the Banks family?
Yes, I do.
How do you know this family?
We live actually across the street from each other. Been neighbors for about 15 years.
And so have you known Brandon Banks then for 15 years?
Yes, I have.
And have you had an opportunity to have contact with him during that time period?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, he and my son pretty much grew up together since they were about 8, playing sports and going to school together. So he is literally like a son to me as well.
I wanted to ask you about his general reputation or character for truthfulness, for basically what type of person he was in the community, because I'm assuming you have lots of contact with him over the last 15 years.
Yes, I have.
You're here all the way from Maryland to speak up on his behalf, is that right?
Yes, sir.
So tell the court what Brandon Banks means to you, what you know about him.
Well, he means to me simply as another son. As I mentioned, our families connected when they moved around in our neighborhood. We were there first, and when they got there, the Banks family and I connected well. I'm literally actually from Washington, D.C., and as a young kid myself, I was exposed to the drugs, the violence, and knowing how to realize if a child did not have the kind of positiveness. And when we met Brandon, both parents agreed that we were both parents that cared for our kids, and I was not going to let my son deal with anybody that was negative. And so when I realized that Brandon was a good kid, positive kid, he and my son became so tight that through middle school they would walk to school together, get on the bus together, all the way through high school, playing sports together, spending the night over each other's houses. Even myself or Mr. Banks would take them to different trips, so they would always be together. And so I was able to see his character and know that because I didn't want my son to be around anybody who had a negative perspective. I knew that Brandon was a good kid, never got in trouble. I never had to go to school for he or my son. And just to be able to see the positiveness in him allowed me to know that he was a great kid, a good kid. They always played basketball, always talked, played around, never got in trouble, not only in school, but in the community as well. And we would go over and play basketball at the Banks house, and I would always see Mike, my son, whose name is Mike as well, and Brandon would help the little kids, and show them and talk to them about positive things and staying out of trouble.
All right,
Yes, sir.
cross-examination.
Mr. Wingard, just very briefly, Brandon Banks came from a very good family. Would you agree?
Yes, I would.
And there is absolutely nothing about his parenting or anything that he could basically blame it on a bad upbringing or anything like that, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And your son did not end up going to college with Mr. Banks, did he?
No, they didn't go to college together, just middle and high school.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. So,
Okay.
did you follow either, I guess on computer, internet, or whatever, the actual trial of this case?
No, I didn't. I actually saw clips of it, on the computer if it came up. Well, not so much as limited, because I was able to see and able to talk to his parents, so I did get information about the case,
From their perspective.
their perspective and what I saw, online.
That's all right.
All right, thank you, sir. You may step down. Next witness.
Moses Goldman,
And where do you live?
Jackson, Tennessee.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm the Executive Vice President and Chaplain at Lane College.
And Lane College is located in Jackson?
Yes, sir.
And what type of college is that?
It's a private Christian college affiliated with the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, liberal arts college.
Do you know Brandon Banks?
I do.
How do you know Brandon Banks?
Brandon was a student at Lane College.
And when was he a student at Lane College?
He came to Lane College in August of 2015
And he was there for how long?
until December of 2016.
Now, were you aware of the circumstances under which he came to Lane College?
I am.
Okay. And how is it that he was able to be admitted into Lane College considering those circumstances?
Lane College, I want to read portions of a press release that our president gave to us or released to the press as we deliberated, and then I'll respond.
Please ask this, you were aware of the pending charges against him prior to his admission into Lane College, is that correct?
I am. I was.
So, some publicity came out as a result of his admission into that college, right?
That is correct.
And the president, I guess, issued a press release?
Issued yes, a statement in response.
Agree with that press release?
I do.
Okay, go ahead and read that.
Okay. It just, Lane College confirms that it has accepted Brandon Banks as a transfer student for the 2015 fall semester. The college is aware that no conviction has been rendered against him and that under the law he is presumed innocent. Based upon conversations with Brandon and his father, the college's chaplain, conversations with judicial officials, a review of the charges against him, an assessment of the college's safety police, and the college's mission and commitment to developing the whole student, the college admitted him. Lane College educates the whole student, including the academic, social, spiritual, and moral aspects of life. His admission is contingent upon his strict adherence to all rules and regulations of the college and monitoring by the college's chaplain. And near the end of the statement, I won't read the remainder of it, but it's just a reminder that we believe as a college that people should have an opportunity to pursue their lives, their livelihood, and we wanted to give Brandon that opportunity in the space that he was currently experiencing. The college was founded on the principle of giving people a second chance or another chance, or foundationally students who may not have an opportunity to get a college education or pursue a college education. It was founded upon the principle of giving those people an opportunity to participate. And when Brandon came to us, we learned that he was having some challenges continuing his education. And so out of our core mission, we extended an invitation to him to study and pursue his interest in playing football at Lane College until such time that he came to trial.
So, did you have contact with Brandon Banks while he was there at Lane College?
I did.
And can you comment or testify with regard to what type of student he was and how he got along with the other students and faculty there?
Yeah, Brandon was an excellent student. He was a model in terms of his behavior. When Brandon came to the college, I was assigned to meet with him weekly to make sure that he was integrating into the college, that he was adhering to the guidelines that we required of him, given the circumstances for which he came to the college. After a period of time, we began to meet monthly, and then on a less regular basis. So I had an opportunity to meet and talk with him quite a bit as he was a student at Lane College.
Those are my questions.
All right, cross-examination.
I'm just curious if you know what judicial officials were consulted about the facts of the case against Mr. Banks?
The college's legal counsel.
Okay, so you're not talking about anybody like from the Davidson County District Attorney's Office or Judge Watkins or anything like that?
We are not.
Okay. Just your in-house legal
Correct.
All right. And be fair to say that based on at least one thing you said, that Mr. Banks' football ability also played into the equation of him being admitted?
It did not. What played into the equation of him being admitted was an opportunity for him to continue to pursue his education. We did know that he was a football player and he was interested in playing football, and we did not want to cut off any opportunities that he had to pursue those interests as a student. We wanted to admit him and give him an opportunity to have the full college experience as his interests and his abilities dictated.
So are you saying that his football ability had zero influence on whether he was admitted as a student?
What I'm saying is that his football ability was not discussed when we discussed the matters of whether or not we should allow him to enter into the college. We didn't discuss him as a football player. We discussed him as a student that was seeking an opportunity to further his education.
Who is the head football coach, or was the head football coach at Lane when he was admitted?
Derek Burrows.
Okay. And did you discuss the matter with Coach Burrows?
We did.
Did you ever go watch him play?
I did.
That's all right.
All right. Thank you, sir. All right. You may step down. Thank you.
Could you state your name, please, sir?
Tyrone White.
Where do you work?
I work for a school district that I prefer not to mention at this time.
Do you know Brandon Banks?
Yes, I do.
How do you know Brandon Banks?
Well, one of the things that I have done for the past 10, 15 years is I speak on college campuses. I also speak to young people. I've coached football. And it has been a passion of mine to speak out on these issues of assault and mistreatment of women. And so several of the colleges that I go to, I am their go-to person for this, and we try to make an impact such that their players get it. And so I reached out to several people. I was aware of what happened at Vanderbilt as other places around the country.
Before we get into your contact with Mr. Banks, did you have a personal event that occurred to you that prompted you to give these speeches and so forth, or give these talks?
My sister was sexually assaulted, and I grew up in a household where I witnessed my mother being beaten by my stepdad. And it was the accumulation of these circumstances, in addition to a close friend of mine who was murdered by her husband while her 4-year-old son watched. And it was these circumstances that drove me to be very passionate about these issues. And plus, I'm the father of daughters.
Okay, let's move on then to your contact then with Brandon Banks. You were aware of this case here at Vanderbilt, right?
Yes.
Okay, what did you do then as a result of that?
Well, I reached out. I did some research and was able to make contact with the sister after finding out where he was from, and spoke to his dad about what my mission was and colleges that call upon me to try to impact their players on these issues. Because we know that a third of all sexual assaults on college campuses are perpetrated by athletes, according to the research out there.
So then what is the topic of discussion then at these talks? Is that what it is then?
It runs the gamut from life skills training, making good decisions, avoiding situations where you could be set up, such as what happened at Toledo with the gambling scandal, University of Toledo, as well as and primarily respecting women and healthy relationships.
So then you reached out, you contacted the Banks family, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
They didn't contact you, right?
No, they didn't even know who I was, I'm sure.
And approximately when was this?
I can't say with any certainty, but I would say probably last spring.
And when you contacted them, what is it that you proposed to them?
I told them what I did, and I asked questions in terms of, what my understanding, based on my understanding of what had happened, what occurred. And then after getting some of those answers, then I asked if, he would be willing to accompany me to various college campuses to speak to male athletes primarily. He also was not the only one. I spoke to Lauren Miller and Mitchell Powell, who was the jury foreman of the first Vanderbilt rape case against Vandenberg. And both of them, understanding what my mission was, agreed. So we went to several universities together. I paid them. Brandon Banks received nothing other than the opportunity to share with athletes what is appropriate and what should be done as it relates to treating women and encountering situations like this.
So how many colleges did Brandon Banks go to and speak?
Let me count. And I'm not going to mention names because out of my obligation to these universities as a consultant. I believe 5.
Were you present then for all these talks?
Yes, I was.
When he is speaking, does he ever mention the facts of the case that he was involved in?
I did not want to stray into anything that could be a legal issue. And so the focus was, if we rewound this situation, if we could, what would be your message to these athletes, to these male athletes? And that's basically what he said. And I can quote one of the things that he said. He said, I would be her hero. I wouldn't stand passively by and allow these things to happen. And that message, amongst the other things that he said that I can't quote verbatim, it hit in a way that even myself as a speaker and other speakers that come in cannot penetrate the male mindset, within that environment. Because when they looked at Brandon, they saw someone like themselves, not someone, not a rapist, but they saw a student athlete. They saw somebody who was trying to accomplish some of the same goals that they were trying to accomplish. And when they heard from him and realized that the consequences that were looming because of his decision, the impact was profound. At major universities, athletes were rushing toward the exit to speak to him. They were talking to their coaches. It resonated unlike I could articulate with words. And I'll say this, as I've done this quite a bit on the college campuses across the United States, I can tell you that many times players, coaches bring speakers in, and it's just to check the box. But then after that speaker has left, male or female, no shift has taken in terms of thinking. We look at Michigan State. They had a 3-hour seminar on sexual assault and respecting women, and 3 weeks later, 3 of their players perpetrated acts of violence towards women. And so I've always been searching for ways to have that impact, to hit that spot. And I can share with you, based on evaluations that I've collected, because I'm always collecting evaluations anytime I do a talk, because I'm trying to tweak and make sure that it's hitting the message. I can tell you, based on those evaluations and what I observed, that he had an impact.
Judge, I'd like to hand to him a portion of the pre-sentence report, a couple of letters I wanted to take a look at right now.
All right.
It's at the very end, last couple pages there.
I do.
I know you didn't want to mention the school you went to, but University of Georgia was one of them, right?
You have the documentation here.
And the letter there is from Kirby Smart, correct?
You have the documentation here.
There's also another letter from, I think that's the Sports Information Director, Jay Chapman.
Yes, you have the documentation here.
He had a positive impact on the players there at the University of Georgia as a result of his talk, correct?
Yes.
And you heard the talk, right?
Yes, I did.
Did he ever minimize his responsibility for his actions in these talks?
Not once.
Did he ever mention the victim in the Vanderbilt case or discuss the facts of the Vanderbilt case?
By name, no, never mentioned. He just said I would have been her as a pronoun hero. And he also expressed tremendous remorse because what I learned from him is that after all these sets of circumstances took place where these acts of violence were perpetrated against the young lady that we're here because of, he spoke about something that was really kind of close to an experience I had as a 9-year-old. He said that when his sister was in a relationship with her husband and pregnant, that he beat her. I experienced that when I was 9. His sister's husband, Brandon's sister's husband. And when he reflected upon that and the circumstances that he had put himself in, he was deeply grieved in the moment, in real time. And it was hard for him to collect himself. And also he shared with one of the audiences that after this situation took place, his sister stopped speaking to him. And the result of the anguish that he's caused on his family, not only just his family, but primarily the young lady that we're here because of. Those are words. I'm not a psychologist. I can't jump inside a person's head to ascertain whether or not it was genuine, but I saw an emotional response.
Those are my questions.
All right, cross-examination.
Mr. White, how long have you been doing these sexual assault speaking engagements?
Over 5 years.
Okay. And have you garnered any national media attention before Mr. Banks joined?
With sexual assault? No.
So it wasn't until he actually joined and started speaking that you had national media coverage?
No, that's not the first time. You're speaking of talks in general?
I'm speaking about receiving national media coverage.
I've received
Yourself and
national
your program.
media coverage, yes.
But prior to Mr. Banks getting involved?
Yes.
Okay. So who else have you had that's been charged with rape that's come and spoke to college students?
No one.
So he is the first person that has been charged with and now convicted of rape that has come and spoken?
Right. The other source of national attention was not a sexual assault oriented.
Okay. How much do you get paid for these speaking engagements?
It varies. But I do want to go further than just giving you a figure, to giving you how those resources are used.
How
Okay.
much are you paid?
Okay. Can I answer the question completely?
Well, you can answer and explain your answer.
Okay. It could range anywhere from $1,500, depending on the program and budget, and our discussions in terms of how much work I'll do with that program per presentation or program, upwards of $6,000. And actually, when I went to, let me correct that, when I went to another university in the South, I was there 2 days to talk about, and it wasn't just sexual assault, it was about healthy relationships. And that didn't involve anybody being with me but me and another high school player or high school graduate player. And for the 2 days I was paid $10,000.
And you stated that Mr. Banks didn't receive any compensation for the schools that he spoke at?
He did not. And let me also explain how I use those resources. And one has direct relationship to the young lady that we're talking about here, is I do a lot of training and mentoring and supporting and encouraging young people, because one of the issues that I find, is I'm sure that you can relate to, is that many of these occurrences, the mindset that gives rise to these occurrences percolate long before college. And so one of the things that I've done is try to get high school students to look at these issues, and particularly males and coaches at the high school level, to be vocal and proactive, to be preemptive, to try to prevent these occurrences from happening, and such that if these kids do matriculate to college, that they have a reservoir of information, hopefully where they make different decisions. In one particular situation, I utilized the resources where some of my high school students made a video speaking in support of the victim in this case.
Okay, but you don't know the victim in this case, correct?
I don't know her personally, no.
You didn't know anyone involved in this case, did you?
No,
But yet you tried to contact every single person involved in this case, didn't you?
but one.
Excuse me?
But for one.
And who was that?
Tip McKenzie.
Okay, but you did try to contact Mr. Vandenberg.
Yes.
You did try to contact Mr. Beatty.
Yes.
You attempted and successfully contacted Mr. Banks.
I was successful with all three. However, the only one that was willing to step forward was Brandon Banks. Vandenberg and his mom were more concerned about, in my effort to try to get something good to happen in the mindset of these athletes, they were more concerned about what the impact would be on them in terms of moving through these proceedings. And so both of them, both mothers, dad, mother, Brandon, Corey Beatty, all said no. And in fact, I can tell you that Corey Beatty's girlfriend, because Corey was communicating with her through phone call while he was incarcerated, they spoke to me like they were trying to negotiate an NFL contract to get compensation out of it. But when I spoke to Brandon Banks, there was no conversation like that, or no, what's in it for me. It was, I'm ready to do this. And so that was the difference.
Mr. White, did you pay for his travel expenses?
No.
Airfare?
No, absolutely not. That came out of the pockets and the resources of, I assume, Maurice Banks and whoever he's got financial resources for to pay for travel and other expenses.
So you didn't compensate him in any way, shape, or
Zip, zero, nada.
But you contacted him, you said, in spring of last year, is that correct?
Absolutely.
And so you already knew what the evidence was in this case. You would follow the first trial. That's why you were reaching out to him. So you knew that he was on video raping this victim.
Go ahead.
Yes or no?
Go ahead. Well, I knew about the facts, but one of the things that I said to you earlier was that I had also talked to Mr. Banks, okay? And when I talked to Vandenberg and also Corey Beatty prior to this, it was before any of that information had come out. So Brandon was the last person that I contacted. I sought to contact and was successful. I was successful with all three. But it was very early on before a lot of these facts and so forth had come out.
So it was before 2015
Yes.
was when you contacted Mr. Banks?
No. As I said, last
So
spring.
my specific question is, at the time that you contacted Mr. Banks, it is after 2015, it is after there has been a trial in this case, and the evidence has been presented that included that there is video footage of Mr. Banks raping the victim in this case.
As I said, I spoke to the dad, and I'm not trying to be confrontational. Let me.
Answer my question.
it's not a yes or no question because it's based on something, okay, that minimize some of the information. Many people can say, you know, as I heard from Mr. Banks, he told me and recounted what his son had shared with him. I'm not going to go into those facts because you all have tried that case. But there were some differences. There were some slight variations to the point where I said, it's worth trying it.
Okay, so you said that while you knew that there was a video of Mr. Banks raping the victim and there were multiple photographs, something that his father said minimized that fact.
It gave additional information.
Okay, and so you determined that Mr. Banks would be a good person to go speak to college students. Mr. Banks, that you know is on video committing an aggravated rape of an unconscious female with 3 co-defendants, that you would bring someone with that weight of evidence that is charged as an aggravated rapist to speak to other college students, and you think that that effort was going to dissuade those students from committing a sexual assault?
Let me share this with you. One of the things that happened at University of Tennessee was you had a college football player by the name of Dre Bowles who did the right thing, and he was beat up. And what came out in my conversation with Mr. Banks was that he was being called gay, he was being threatened,
hold on.
and other things happened.
Mr.
Go ahead.
Okay, you're getting off track right here, okay?
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Mr. White, you actually attempted to contact the victim in this case.
Yes, I did.
You researched her to find her personal information to try to contact her.
To see if she would be interested in speaking to these athletes.
Mr. White, do you realize that that is a violation and that someone that is trained on sexual assault victims would never do that?
Hold on.
Free country, you can contact whoever wants to contact.
All right, let's move on.
Mr. White, you said that Mr. Banks' message to those students, if he could rewind, was that he would be her hero and not just stand passively by.
Like a Dre Bowles at University of Tennessee.
But you knew that he was on video raping the victim.
I didn't see all of the video.
I don't have
Anything
Right.
further?
If I'd seen video,
Okay, thank you, Mr. White. You may
Okay.
sit down.
thank you.
Any other witness? All right.
Can you state your name for the record, please?
Maurice Banks.
And Mr. Banks, you
You'll
are the
need to get a little bit closer to the microphone.
father of Brandon Banks, is that correct?
I am.
And Mr. Banks, what is your wife's name?
Wendy,
And how long have you and your wife been married?
36 years.
And where do you live currently?
Brandywine, Maryland.
And how long have you lived in Maryland?
36 years.
And how many children do you and your wife have?
We have 4.
And if you would start with the oldest child and just give their name and their age, please.
My daughter is Brandy Banks Wells, 36.
And she's here in the court.
She's here with me.
Correct.
My son, Maurice Banks the fourth, who is 33. I have a middle son, Andrew, William Andrew, who is 28. He plays American football in Brazil. And then Brandon, 23.
And Mr. Banks, what do you do for a living?
I'm a youth pastor.
And how long have you been doing the job of a pastor?
Since 1986.
And if you would tell the judge just a little bit about Brandon growing up, at what age?
Please refer to him by his full name or by Mr. Banks, please.
Sorry. Could you tell the court about Mr. Banks, your son, as how he was as a teenager?
Just a great kid, bright, easygoing, quiet, competitive, fun-loving, always helpful. I think Mr. Wingard shared that it was nothing for Brandon to pause in his life to teach somebody something he had learned or coach another kid up, even bring him in the house and train him in the weight room. If we were with family, Brandon was the one who played with the little kids. He had taken younger kids to the pond to catch turtles. He was that kid, just really a kind-hearted, very affectionate, just a great kid.
And at any time prior to Brandon leaving your home and going to school at Vanderbilt, did he ever get in any trouble, either with the law or otherwise?
Never. Never in school, never had to go visit or talk to a teacher because of his conduct. As his dad, I visited his teachers once a quarter. I wanted them to know that I was interested in what he was learning and that I cared about him, and not one time did I ever hear anybody talk about his conduct or his behavior. He's never had any issue with the law, not even a speeding ticket, nothing.
And were you a part of your son's decision to go to Vanderbilt University?
Our entire family was. We talked about it. We weighed all of his options. We prayed about it. And so we all were involved.
And up until the incident that we're here about today, were you aware of any trouble or issues that your son had at Vanderbilt prior to the incident?
No, not trouble. I wouldn't say trouble. We certainly talked about the academic challenges of being at Vanderbilt, but he's never been in trouble.
And Mr. Banks, after the incident that took place that we're here about today, did you and your wife come to Nashville and eventually take your son back to Maryland with you?
Yes, we did.
And since that time, have you and your entire family been supportive of Mr. Banks?
Sure. We know who he is. We know his heart. And so we certainly support and have been supportive of him, our entire family. In fact, our community. I will share with you, and as tough as this is to say, there was no way that I could really afford his legal fees. And so people in our neighborhood, our community, our family, $100 here, $250 here, $1,000 here, that posted his bond, paid his bond, and paid his legal fees. Our community, our family and friends know Brandon, care about Brandon, so they're all supportive. I have a friend here now from New Jersey who is here in court just to support Brandon. So.
And Mr. Banks, were you and your family supportive of Brandon's returning to school?
Mr. Banks, please.
I'm sorry. Supportive of your son's return to Lane College while these proceedings were pending?
Yes, absolutely.
And is there anything that you want to be able to say here to the judge about your son, Mr. Banks?
Certainly. There are a couple of things I want to clear up that were said, if that's okay. With regard to Brandon and his talking about his sister and her husband, it was her sister's boyfriend, not her husband, her current husband. So I would certainly hate for her to have to go back and have to explain that. When we talked about partnering with Mr. White, this wasn't about Brandon trying to act like he wasn't a part of anything or trying to get out of anything. When Brandon came home, when you referred to my wife having to come down and get him, Brandon immediately started talking to young men in our community, kids that he coached, the different high schools, about choices that they make and the impact that it could have on their lives as his decision or lack thereof had negatively impacted his life. And so he immediately decided he wanted to try and make a difference. This wasn't about glorifying Brandon. This was about Brandon understanding that that this situation could have some redemptive, redeeming value. And so he tried to make the best of what was the worst situation he'd ever been in, the worst situation our family had ever been in. But he began to expose himself and to say to people, listen, this is who I am. As tough as that is, this is who I am. And so he started that conversation. I remember being in high school, there was a group out of our local prison, a program called Scared Straight, where criminals, murderers, drug addicts would come talk to us about their experiences in prison and their life afterwards. And it changed my life. So I think people who are in this situation have a different impact because their story is a genuine story and it's not something written in a textbook. And so Brandon began to do that. When we got the call to speak to other students, it wasn't about trying to minimize his role. Brandon wanted to see if there was one life he could keep from having their parents sit in a room like I'm sitting in a room. If there was one family that Brandon could avoid having to go through what our family went through, if Brandon could avoid one young lady having to sit through what was read in that letter, he wanted to try and make that difference. And that's what this was about. It wasn't about him trying to minimize. It wasn't about trying. He never talked about the young lady that we're here about. He never talked about that other than to say if he could do it differently, these are the things he would do differently. When we as a family get together and pray, Brandon leads our prayer about the young lady that we're here about. He prays for her heart, her healing, her recovery. He prays for her family. So it's not about Brandon trying to absolve himself of anything. Brandon wanted to take this and try to ensure that the next person wouldn't be sitting in that seat because they would have at least had somebody say to them, here are the consequences. Here's the destruction that this does, not only to the individual, but to the victim.
And Mr. Banks, did you travel with your son and Coach White to any of these speaking engagements?
I did. I traveled with the first one, and I was online. Virtually got to see the second one.
And did you pay for your son, Mr. Banks' travel expenses?
Yes, I paid for his travel expenses. I took him. I wanted to be with him. I wanted to make sure he was protected. I wanted to make sure he didn't talk about the facts of the case, so where I could, and I did.
Thank you for the questions I have
all
to
right.
say to counsel.
Cross-examination.
Ms. Banks, and I do appreciate, I'm sure Robert does as well, clarifying that Mr. White has facts a little wrong on that, correct?
I'm not going to say he had his facts wrong. I think he wasn't clear on what the relationship was.
Now, one of the things about mentioned having prisoners come and speak, those would be people who had already been convicted of their crimes, correct?
In this instance, for me, they were.
Yes, that's
Yes, sir.
how that works, and they come in and they tell the audience what they've done, what crimes they've committed, and what punishment they've received for their acts, correct?
Close, yes, sir.
I mean, in general, as opposed to someone coming in being charged with a crime, these would be people who have already gone through the process and are in prison.
Yeah.
You understand?
Yeah, I don't know if any of them had been charged. I don't know that that would have made a difference to me. I think people having an experience that alters the course of their life in a way that is life-changing, the impact would have been the same. And I think I would have received the message regardless.
Well, was the message to be directed to you, or was it another audience? That's what
We were students. We were students in school, so we were brought into an auditorium, and they shared that information with us with an attempt to get us to think differently.
So this wasn't something that you're currently, we're talking about in the past. but
Yes, sir.
Yeah, understand that now. So with respect to the various universities, were they all in the SEC that your son went to?
No, sir, not all SEC.
It says, you talked about you paid for his expenses when he went to the various universities. Did you pay for his expenses when he went to Houston to visit, or, you know what I'm talking about the Toria McKenzie?
No, I didn't pay for that.
Okay. Did you know anything about that in advance?
About him going to Houston? I don't know if there's an underlying that you're trying to get to. I know about all of his travel. So I do know that he was going to Houston and didn't know he was going to Houston in advance.
Well, you obviously heard that come out during the trial.
Yes, sir. But I also know that in the trial, it was indicated that if Brandon had reached out to Mr. McKenzie to kind of get together just prior to the trial. What wasn't mentioned was Mr. McKenzie texting Brandon on 3 other occasions saying, hey, let's get together. You're gonna be in Mississippi at a track meet. I'm gonna try to get over and connect with you. On 3 separate instances that weren't mentioned in trial, Mr. McKenzie attempted to reach out to Brandon. Brandon simply said to him, hey, I'm gonna be close to you if you want to get together.
All right, thank you. Thank you, sir. All right, any other proof? Okay, I'll hear each side.
Judge, the state has submitted enhancement factors, which the state reiterates that the circumstances of this case include the victim being completely unconscious during the commission of this offense. And the state submits that accounts to her being treated with exceptional cruelty, as well as that she was particularly vulnerable. Additionally, there were personal injuries inflicted upon the victim. The counts of the indictment, bodily injury is not one of the elements of the offense, and Your Honor did hear testimony and proof regarding the injuries to the victim, which included bruising on multiple places of her body, including her buttocks, scratches on her ankles, which the nurse practitioner testified that they were on the outsides of her ankles, a cut to her knee, soreness to her shoulder, etc., all from the totality of what happened to her that night, which included Mr. Banks carrying her down that dorm room hallway. The offense was also involved a victim and was committed to gratify the defendant's desire for pleasure or excitement. The case law supports that aggravated rape, the actions being for the purpose of desire, pleasure, or excitement is not implicit in the charge, that many times that rapes are committed to punish and for many other more illicit reasons. However, Mr. Banks took 23 photographs, the majority of which were very close-up images of the victim's vagina, and that the crime was committed under circumstances under which the potential for bodily injury to this victim was very great. Again, she was completely unconscious. There was testimony by Mr. McKenzie and even admitted by Mr. Banks that they felt like she might have been drugged. They had never seen anyone in that state, and she was drugged out into a hallway, basically completely naked and left there with no one. And the state submits that the potential for even more bodily injury does exist. In responding to the mitigating factors submitted by the defense, the state submits that the proposed mitigating factor number 1, as it relates to serious bodily injury, that is not supported. Again, I've already stated the injuries that she submitted during this offense. The defense submits that the defendant acted under strong provocation. That element is actually typically used in a self-defense or voluntary manslaughter case. The state submits that there is no evidence in this case that would support that mitigating factor, that there was strong provocation. Number 3, they submit that there are substantial grounds exist tending to excuse or justify his conduct, which the state submits that the testimony that the court heard during the trial, and again today, is that Mr. Banks comes from an amazing family. He had a wonderful upbringing. He has loving parents that continue to support him to this day. He got a great high school education and college education and had every opportunity in the world, which Your Honor obviously sees people every day that do not have those luxuries. And even when you have some type of mental disability or circumstances in your life that make your life not as wonderful as submit that he played a minor role in the offense, which the state submits that the defendant is a principal actor in the aggravated rape and aggravated sexual battery of this victim, and therefore that factor just does not apply. Even as a non-principal actor, the fact that he was there and extremely aware of what his co-defendants were doing, and he did nothing to prevent it or to assist, that even under that circumstances, that would prevent that mitigating factor from applying to this offense. They also submit that because of youth, he lacked substantial judgment in committing the offense, which again, the state submits that this is a 20-year-old Vanderbilt University college student who comes from an amazing family, and this factor, I mean, it hasn't even been applied to teenagers that don't come from that background. The state submits there just is no evidence to support that. They submit 9 and 10 that the defendant assisted the authorities in the prosecution of the co-defendants. The state submits that that mitigating factor does not apply at all to Mr. Banks, as he did not voluntarily contact the police to report this crime. He actually actively participated in efforts to cover up the crime. He deleted the photographs taken on his phone. He participated in conversations where the co-defendant, Mr. Vandenberg, was discussing purposely initiating sexual intercourse with the victim the following day to ensure that she didn't remember anything about the aggravated rape they committed the night before. When he was questioned by Vanderbilt Dean of Students, G.L. Black, Mr. Banks lied to Mr. Black and denied participating in this rape in any way. Again, when Mr. Banks was questioned by Detective Mayo and Sergeant Shreve of the Metro Nashville Police Department, he again lied and did not admit to his participation at all. It was not until after Jaboria McKenzie voluntarily contacted the Metro Nashville Police Department and District Attorney's Office and provided a statement, and after Mr. Vandenberg had made admissions about the rape to detectives, and after Mr. Banks received an entire open file discovery, that he initiated any contact with the prosecution, which that statement has not been admitted into evidence in this trial. But there was testimony in which Mr. Banks even admitted that he didn't make any mention whatsoever of threats of injury to him during that interview. I just submit that that factor cannot apply based on the evidence in this case. They also submit mitigating factor number 11, that the defendant committed the offense under such unusual circumstances that it is likely that a sustained intent to violate the law motivated his conduct, which the state submits that this was a 32-minute attack on this victim. Mr. Banks took 23 photographs, and based on that alone, that mitigating factor does not apply. Number 12, they submit that he acted under duress or the domination of another person, which the court is well aware, and the state submits that the evidence does not support duress when the only testimony was that Mr. Banks said that he was being teased. And they go on to list other factors as kind of other factors consistent with the purpose of this chapter, which the state just admits that the lack of a prior record, while it does not support an enhancement factor, it in and of itself does not support a mitigating factor. And for those reasons, the state requests that this court sentence Mr. Banks and weigh those factors that sentence him to an enhanced sentence.
All right, thank you. Mr. Scruggs?
Let me ask the judge, have you read the notice of enhancing factors and mitigating factors?
Of course I have.
Okay, I figured you guys, you know, I could spend 2 hours going through all this, but I'm not going to. I would respectfully submit that the evidence did not support General Norman's account of the enhancing factors. In fact, I think it more supports the mitigating factors by the fact that he was found not guilty in 5 out of 7 of the counts. So as far as his role in the offense is concerned, it's greatly diminished versus the others that were involved. I would just simply point out and ask the court to consider, what is justice? What I'm getting from the state is that justice is about revenge. That's what they want more than anything else, is revenge. I would submit that justice is doing what's right under the circumstances. And I understand the court has to follow the law, and the court is required to look at enhancing and mitigating factors and so forth. I would submit that under the law, the mandatory minimum is 15 years, day for day, 100% with a life sentence when it comes to the sex offender registry and supervision and so forth. I would submit that that is more than adequate to be what is right under the circumstances, considering the facts of the case. And I would respectfully submit that the 15 years mandatory minimum should be sentenced.
All right. Thank you both, and thank all of you who have testified, as well as I want to give my appreciation for the victim's impact statement. Well, as you all know, I've sat through 4 trials. I've lived through this experience for the last 4+ years now, and I'm very familiar with all of the facts and have a fairly good perception of all of the individuals involved in this matter. As I've stated before, the defendants in this particular case are not your typical defendants. Most defendants who come before me have a different kind of background, have prior criminal records, and oftentimes by the time they get to sentencing, not only do they have prior records, they have records that they have accumulated between the time that they were charged with the original offense and they're being sentenced for that offense. In this case, of course, Mr. Banks just has the offenses that he was charged with and convicted of. He has no prior record. I have looked at the enhancement and mitigating factors in this case, as I always do, and I try to look at the entire individual and listen to those who support him as well as those who are not in support of him or her, as the case may be. So I don't think there's much more that I need to say about it. I believe that the proper sentence is 15 years for count 3, 8 years for count 6, and he will have to deal with the sexual offender registry matter the rest of his life. That's the judgment of the court. And that will be concurrent, of course.
All rise.